ordinance, city council in the town of Atherton, adding a new chapter 12.18 to the Atherton Municipal Code, establishing regulations regarding mobile food vending.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Mobile food vending, food trucks, food carts, they're all becoming very commonplace and you see them in a number of other communities. In Atherton, we don't really have the food truck conventions coming to town. What we have are food trucks that frequent construction sites throughout the community. Current regulation is only by the requirement of a business license, health permit, vehicle code requirements, but we need some additional regulation to address safety concerns where they park on the sides of the road, other vehicles come to and from, workers or customers come across the street, creates kind of a hazard. The ordinance before you this evening addresses a number of those time, place, and manner issues. It's recommended that the council introduce the ordinance, schedule the second reading and adoption for April, and direct the city clerk to read the ordinance by title only.
Beautiful, thank you very much. Let's bring it back to council. Any questions for George?
Yes, I asked George this yesterday, and we're not 100% clear. In the section, I think it's 1218.040, sales from vending vehicles, it did talk about making sure the vehicle is pulled 100% off the street. And I guess the question would be, and while I don't argue with the need for the safety, two things come to mind. One is some of our streets are fairly narrow, and I'm not sure that a vehicle could do that without maybe driving on somebody's. It might even still be the public easement, but as we all know, a number of residents do plant onto it, and we might be causing a secondary issue with a truck it's pulling onto their plantings. And so that would be an issue, or it could cause the vending truck to be pulled up several houses in it before or after where the construction actually is doing, because they're often serving people that are working in the construction sites and causing a nuisance for somebody. And so my question would be, are we sure that pulling 100% off is we can accommodate that? And then also, if they're not going to park in front of the construction site, are we going to have a limitation? Perhaps we should consider a limitation, or have we considered putting a limitation on how far they could be from the site that they're actually serving?
Well, in answer to the first one, on pulling off, we do want them entirely off the roadway. And as you and I talked about, it's probably going to be a problem if they're pulling onto somebody's private vegetation. How we would write that into the ordinance, I'm not quite sure. I think maybe we should look at it from an enforcement perspective, and if they're damaging private property improvements, then you have another challenge for them. For the second part of your question about where they can park, this ordinance doesn't say they got frequent construction sites. They could actually go anywhere in town and park their vehicle, and it's not a requirement for construction sites, so I'm not sure how we would do that. They are limited to 1 hour at any one site.
Not anymore. Not schools.
Not much.
Right, yeah, they have limited exceptions for schools and things like that, but around the community in general, they could be 5 doors down from a construction site and still be legal, but only for an hour at a time.
But for a 3-month construction, that could become a nuisance for somebody, and then, you know, just, we don't want to have unintended consequences.
Right.
So.
Perfect. Councilmember Lewis.
So I have a question about the definitions. Section 12.18.020 definitions, A, B, C, D, and it's, you know, how complete are these definitions? How specific, and are we sure that they will cover all situations that we need them to cover?
And there's always an entrepreneur out there who can figure a way around it.
Well,
sure.
that's, you know,
We can't usually cover it all, but perhaps Bill can address some of that.
These are right out of the health and safety code, or the food. There is something called the food law. I didn't even know that. And the vehicle code. So these are all definitions that are in other people's ordinances, and they are in the state law as it is right now. And by the way, state law right now says they can park anywhere they want in a residential district as long as their wheels are close to the curb. Well, we only have a few curbs, and so we had to be a little creative, and we appreciate, you know, Councilmember Whitmer's concerns, but at the same time, it's a bigger concern, I believe, if you talk to the police chief, to put the vehicle out in the roadway. And so we're kind of splitting here. They could park 3 doors down today without any restriction. In fact, there are no restrictions today, and we have them in town already. This is an ordinance designed to give us some control, some tools when we have problems. It's not, there's no onerous, regulations that will make them jump through hoops.
Okay, so another quick question is, in the whereases, the third whereas, it says, town desires to prohibit mobile food vending from public property other than the public streets and roads. What about with authorization, like public property, like say the park, if there's an event at the park, or?
Okay, that's covered a little farther
Is
down.
it's
in the
covered,
ordinance, yeah.
but should we not do something with that whereas then? It seems like it's in conflict.
I think the whereases are basically giving you broad parameters, reasons to do the regulation. And in most cases, you don't want the vendors driving into the park and parking there. At least the police, I've had some issues about that, especially, during the evening hours before they close the park. And so the concept is, the whereases give you the reasons for drafting the regulation. The regulation says, here's the regulation, but there may be some exceptions.
Okay.
I'm good.
Vice Mayor Floyd, any questions?
Just a clarification on the locations where vending is prohibited. The language for sales at the train depot and public parking property, if I understand that, they're prohibited from selling in this strip here unless they get specific permission from Caltrain on one hand for Caltrain property or from the city for any of the parking facility of the city. Is that correct?
That's correct. If we had an event here, we could authorize them.
So, on that
Question?
same thing, would that, use of depot property or from the town, would that be and? Is it or an and?
The depot owns
It's
some
either or.
parking, and we own some parking, so we have to include both as possibilities, separately.
Okay, but wouldn't they have to, so
They could
it's
do it-
not an and?
No, it's an or, because they could do it on just their property, or they could do it on just our property, or they could do it on both.
Okay, and or?
No, I don't,
I think or is better is fine.
I don't recommend
Or is,
and ors,
okay.
I recommend
right,
ors.
okay. And then there's a quotation mark at the end of noise restrictions. that
That's
I
because
don't
this whole thing,
The whole thing is
there's
quote.
another quote somewhere,
in the beginning?
at the very, we're on page 2, just before section 12.18.010, purpose and intent.
Oh,
There's the first quotation mark, because all that goes into the city code, the rest of it does not.
got it.
Hmm.
Well, did you notice
Did you?
that?
No, I noticed the one you pointed to, but didn't see the one at the beginning.
I'm good.
Perfect. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'm going to open it up for public comments on this item. Seeing no public comments, I'm going to go ahead and close public comments, bring it back to council. Any further comments from council?
I'll make a comment.
Please.
I think it's appropriate for us to be considering this ordinance. I have noticed that there is a food truck that parks on Atherton Avenue, not close to, well, not in the immediate proximity of a construction site, but let's face it, there's always a construction site around some corner, no matter where you are in Atherton. So it's within walking distance of a construction site, but the people who pull up every day to buy from the food truck, and there's on a given day from 5 to maybe 12 cars that pull up, I think it's important that they be off the road.
Perfect. Any other comments? I have one.
The city clerk, can you read the title?
I have one, and George and you and I had spoke about it. I just want to see an acknowledgement as we issue the permit, that they sign something that says they acknowledge the fact that they cannot use their horn for amplified horn. Yeah,
Make sure they know it's there.
Yes.
yeah.
Everybody seems to know the tune.
Well, the problem is I start dancing and we'd start going towards the truck, so it'll give me less exercise for the day. So,
Exactly.
all right, so, that being said,
The motion, Mr. Mayor, would be to introduce the ordinance, direct city clerk to read it by title only, and schedule the second reading and adoption for April.
perfect. Seeing anybody want to,
I'll make that motion.
perfect, do I have a second on that
Second.
motion? Any discussion further on that motion? Oh, I apologize. Any
No,
po-
No,
you're-
you
I
asked-
already did,
no, you-
already did help.
You did, it was real quick.
Thank you. Apologize.
all those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No, seeing none.
Oh,
But we
she's
couldn't
got
have the
to.
title read,
Oh.
She gets her day.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
this one.
the dramatic reading.
Okay.
Introduction of an ordinance of the City Council of the Town of Atherton, adding a new chapter 12.18 to the Atherton Municipal Code, establishing regulations regarding mobile food vending.
Third. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No, seeing none.
Everybody good.
Perfect, thank you very much. So let's go ahead and move on to the regular agenda, item number 19, Civic Center Project Master Plan, changes and authorization to begin the environmental work.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I think we're at a tipping point with this particular project. As Robert and Cheryl set up here, I'm going to do the introduction for the formal presentation. The reality of the magnitude of the project and its impact now and in the future, that's kind of what's before the council this evening. The master plan is the elevated view of this particular project. Months of work by residents, the committee staff, and consultants have come into this. Now's the time to start on the details. The project will have a lasting impact on this community. In order to reach reality, it must be well thought, well managed, and budget driven. I think you're going to hear that echoed by Steve Dostart this evening, chair of the CCAC committee. HMC is present to walk through how we got where we are today. CCAC is present to answer any questions the council might have about the process and their input. And after you hear the presentation, followed by any Q&A, there are 4 simple recommendations that we're asking the council for this evening. The first is to accept the master plan and cost estimates.